Welcome back, everyone, for another deep dive. This time, we're going to be looking at something pretty complex.
Yeah.
We're going to be trying to understand India's role in the Russia-Ukraine war.
Right.
And we've got a stack of news articles here and really interesting analysis of Modi's leadership.
Oh, okay.
To kind of try to unpack all this. So we're going to be looking at some pretty interesting things.
Yeah.
We're going to be looking at Zelensky's appeal to Modi, the potential for India to host a peace summit,
Right.
and the just general dance that India has to do between Russia and the West.
Yeah, it's a tough position for them to be in for sure.
So let's jump right in. Zelensky in a recent interview with the Times of India.
Okay.
He really didn't mince words. He just straight up named Modi as someone who could be a game changer in ending this war.
Yeah, he really did. He said, I'm quoting here, PM Modi can influence the end of the Ukraine war. This is the huge value of him in any conflict.
Wow.
That's a pretty big statement.
That is a huge statement.
Yeah.
What do you think is behind Zelensky reaching out to Modi so directly?
Well, I think there are a couple things. First of all, India's influence is undeniable.
Right.
They're a major economic force. They have a huge population, and they're really starting to assert themselves more on the global stage.
Yeah.
But I think the real key here is their non-aligned stance.
Okay.
They haven't come out and explicitly said we're with Russia or we're with the West.
So they were like Switzerland.
Kind of like Switzerland, but with a lot more power.
Gotcha.
And of course, they have good relationships with both Russia and the West.
Right.
So Zelensky's looking at them as a potential bridge.
Like someone who can maybe, get both sides talking again.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So how does this all play out in practice, though? Because, India's been pretty quiet about condemning the invasion itself, haven't they?
They have. They've been walking a very fine line.
Right.
They haven't outright condemned Russia, but they have emphasized the importance of respecting national sovereignty and territorial integrity, which is very clearly a message directed at Moscow.
Interesting.
And it's not just talk. Modi made it a point to visit Kyiv after visiting Moscow earlier this year.
Oh, wow.
So, he's trying to show that he's engaging with both sides.
Okay. So it really is that balancing act. But how long can they keep that up? Especially with the West putting on the pressure.
It's a good question because India still relies heavily on Russia for arms.
Oh, right.
Things like fighter jets and missiles. And while the sanctions have made things difficult, they've been hesitant to cut those ties completely.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's a tough position to be in.
Yeah.
So with all this going on, how does Modi's leadership style kind of play into this whole thing? He's not exactly known for being passive, is he?
No, he's not. The analysis you sent me, Narendra Modi, India's most powerful post-independence leader.
Right.
It really paints a picture of him as a strong man. He's got this centralized control.
Yeah.
And he's very decisive.
So do you think he's more likely to roll the dice and try to mediate this conflict than a leader who's more focused on, say, consensus building?
It's possible. I think Modi's not afraid to break with convention.
Yeah.
Or to, push boundaries when he feels it's necessary.
Okay.
And he might see this as an opportunity to solidify India's role as a global power.
Right.
To really step up and be the one to broker peace.
So what tools would he actually have to do that?
Well, he's got a few options. India has significant economic leverage. They could limit access to resources, for example. Or, they could appeal to Putin directly, maybe even leverage their personal relationship.
Right, because they do have a fairly good relationship, don't they?
They do. And remember when Zelensky suggested that India could help facilitate the return of those Ukrainian children who were taken to Russia?
Yeah.
That's the kind of humanitarian appeal that I think Modi might find compelling.
Right. So it's not just about saying nice things. It's about actually taking some concrete action.
Exactly.
Wow. Okay. So it seems like, Zelensky's really looking for action and maybe Modi is the guy to do it.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to see how this plays out.
But to really understand this whole thing, we kind of have to zoom out a bit and look at the bigger picture.
Yeah.
Especially the recent BRICS summit.
Okay.
So first of all, for those who don't know, can you just give us a quick overview of what BRICS is and why it's so important here?
Sure. BRICS stands for Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's this group of major emerging economies.
Okay.
And they've come together to kind of create a counterweight to the traditional Western powers.
Right.
Now, Zelensky actually criticized the recent summit.
He did?
Yeah, he called it a failure for Putin.
Wow.
And he pointed out the absence of leaders from Saudi Arabia and Brazil.
Interesting. Okay, so why does this matter for India's position on the war in Ukraine?
Well, the war is really shaking up global alliances. It's forcing countries to rethink who their friends are and what their interests are.
Yeah.
And India's right in the middle of all this.
Right.
On the one hand, they're a key member of BRICS,
Right.
which has Russia as a founding member.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, they have these complex relationships with the West.
Right.
And they're under pressure to take a stronger stance against Russia.
So it's more than just an economic alliance then?
It's about geopolitics and global power.
Wow. So how do you think this war is going to affect India's relationship with BRICS in the long run?
That's a great question. To answer that, though, we need to take a closer look at how India's potential role in mediating the conflict might play out within that alliance.
This is getting really interesting. Let's take a quick break and we'll dive back into it right after this.
Sounds good.
So we were talking about how this war in Ukraine is really kind of shaking things up in this BRICS alliance.
Right.
And with India kind of in the middle of it all, how do you see their role as a potential mediator? Like, how would that play out within BRICS?
Well, it's a really fascinating scenario.
Okay.
Imagine if India was able to broker peace.
Yeah.
It could be a real game changer for BRICS.
Really? How so?
Well, it would show that they're not just an anti-Western alliance,
Right.
but a group of nations capable of taking independent action and really, showing global leadership.
So it could actually strengthen the alliance.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, there's always a risk that Russia might feel sidelined.
Right.
But the upside is that BRICS could gain a whole new level of legitimacy.
Okay.
Right now, they're kind of seen as just, pushing back against the West.
Yeah.
But if they can show that they can resolve major international conflicts,
Right.
it would give them a lot more influence.
So it's like they'd be, stepping up to the big leagues of global diplomacy.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that. So where does Modi fit into all of this? I mean, with his tendency towards centralized power.
Yeah, that's an important point. Well, I remember the analysis you shared.
Yeah.
It highlighted how Modi's been able to concentrate power in a way that few other Indian leaders have. And that gives him a lot of freedom to make bold moves on the international stage.
So he could really make a big push for peace in Ukraine
He could.
without facing a lot of pushback from within India.
Yeah, potentially. And I think Zelensky's kind of hoping for that.
Yeah, it seems like he's really encouraging India to take on a more active role.
He is. He wants them to go beyond just words of support.
And it seems like Modi, with his leadership style, might be the one to do it.
It's possible. It's definitely a fascinating dynamic to watch.
It really is. And it raises an important question.
What's that?
What would a successful peace settlement brokered by India actually mean for the global balance of power?
Wow. That's a big one.
Yeah, it would be a massive shakeup, wouldn't it?
It would. It would be a sign that the global order that we've known for decades is changing.
Like the U.S. and Europe being at the center.
Exactly. It would signal that emerging economies like India are ready to take on a much bigger role.
And it would force the U.S. and China to really rethink their whole approach to BRICS, wouldn't it?
Absolutely. This wouldn't just be about Ukraine anymore.
Yeah.
It would be about reshaping the entire international system.
Wow, this is really mind-blowing.
Yeah, we've gone from Zelensky's appeal to talking about a potential global power shift.
I know, it's amazing. So as we kind of wrap up here, I want to bring it back to the listener for a second.
Sure.
We've been talking about all these complex issues, geopolitics, alliances, and the potential for big power shifts. Why should someone who's maybe not directly affected by this war in Ukraine, why should they care about all this?
Well, because this isn't just about a conflict in some faraway place.
Right.
What happens next could affect their lives.
How so?
Well, it could determine the future of global stability, economic prosperity,
Right.
even the basic principles of international cooperation.
So it's bigger than just one war.
Much bigger. The decisions being made right now could determine whether we move towards a multipolar world or if we slip back into something like the Cold War.
And what about things like global trade or energy prices? Would that be affected?
Absolutely. The outcome of this conflict could have ripple effects on all sorts of things.
Yeah, like climate change or even, technological innovation.
Right. This is stuff that affects everyone on the planet.
So we're all kind of on the edge of our seats watching this unfold.
Yeah, it's like we're watching a slow-motion train wreck.
Except instead of a train, it's the entire global order.
I like that. That's a good analogy.
And we're all kind of on board.
Right. And India is one of the countries holding the controls.
This is pretty heavy stuff. I need a second to process all this.
Okay, let's take a moment and then we'll come back to wrap up this discussion.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.
So we're back, and wow, this deep dive has taken us on quite a journey.
It has.
From Zelensky's appeal to Modi, all the way to like the potential for India to, kind of reshape the whole global landscape.
Yeah, it's a lot to think about.
It really is.
Yeah.
So as we wrap up, I want to bring it back to the listener for a second.
Okay.
We've talked about all these really complex issues, geopolitics, alliances, this potential shift in global power. Why should the average person care about all this?
Because what happens next could really affect their lives in ways that they might not even realize.
In what way?
Well, think about it. This isn't just about, some conflict happening on the other side of the world.
Right.
It's about the future of global stability, economic prosperity, the basic principles of how countries work together.
You're saying it could impact things like global trade, energy prices.
Absolutely. All of that could be affected by how this conflict plays out.
Wow. So it's really like we're all standing on the edge of a cliff here,
Yeah.
looking out at a future that hasn't been written yet.
It's a good way to put it. And India, with its unique position and, with a leader like Modi,
right,
they're one of the countries holding the pen, so to speak.
That's a powerful image. So as we wrap up this deep dive, we want to leave you with a final thought to consider. Imagine a world where India does manage to broker peace in Ukraine. What would that world look like? How would that change the global balance of power? What would it mean for international relations as we know it?
Those are some really big questions.
They are.
And the answers could really shape the world that we all live in.
So keep asking those questions.
Yeah.
Keep exploring these issues and keep diving deep. Thanks for joining us.
Don't forget to like and subscribe.